Some people with stage 4 cancer begin to think about their cancer as an enemy and as a curse, of course, and I suppose get into a position of anger, frustration with it, because it's, taken over your body and undoing you. At stage 4, it's gone beyond just one localised area. Other people I've read have actually, with other traditions or Eastern traditions, have looked back at their cancer and said it's part of them, it's part of their cells, so it's the same as their arm or their fingers or their legs, and taken an approach of personalising their cancer and talking to it and loving it and nurturing it. I didn't have that feeling of hating or loving the cancer. I was obviously gripped by fear and anxiety about the pain it was giving me through my spine and ribs, and the scans that doctors told me and experts told me that this thing was going to end my life very abruptly. But I came to see the cancer more as probably the best boss I'd ever had. And my stage 4 lung cancer, I can say, was the most honest and forthright boss I've ever had in my life. We live in an interesting world where our bosses like to pretend to be friends, and people can go away on weekends and drink and socialise and try and ignore who's in charge. We also live in an area where corporate speak wraps up quite inhumane and stressful and toxic work cultures and dresses it up as some kind of good. And this happens in a lot of workplaces. The culture is actually toxic, and the propaganda is very false. Cancer doesn't engage in false friendships or even need an ideology of corporate propaganda to proceed. As you get each progressive scan, if your situation's deteriorating, its progress is slow and steady. It's not a curse. It's statistically more prevalent because the conditions and the exposure to risks in the modern world, where longer lifespans generally, and more exposure to multiple risks, seems to me make the 50% expected cancer rates in Australia a mathematical reality and an inevitability. So it's a good boss at that level. It has no regard to keeping you alive. It's exploiting your resources, your cells, and any of the conditions that you allow it to grow. And each scan is a pretty brutal kind of wake-up call. So any kind of mindsets about beliefs about good and evil, cancer's no more or less evil than a tiger snake. Just don't stand on the tiger snake and you won't get bit, That's how I was raised. Keep a safe distance. So while, I pressed medical practitioners for a single source of why, as a non-smoker, I would get lung cancer, as I've survived and read more, it became apparent multiple risks, stress, exposure to asbestos, exposure to obesity, exposure to sugar, exposure to carcinogenic meats, exposure to alcohol. I mean, the list just kept going on. And from a legal point of view, a lot of these risks have got themselves covered legally because our system of laws have meant that these things can't be pointed to as single causes. So I never bought the idea that it just fell on me, that it was a bad lottery ticket or a curse. But I did consider it was a boss, a brutal, deadly, and meticulous boss. But I had invited it into my system one way or another, either through compliance with bad thinking about diets or through, pressures of society or whatever you want to call it, and following your taste buds, following patterns that were against my immune system. Because the cells are only growing. Cancer cells and tumours are only growing because your immune system is not doing its job. The major dysfunction in this bad and deadly boss is that part of your defence system has been stunted or suppressed. So my focus was never on worrying about being cursed or etc. or even big pharma, or the fact that that chemo offered limited options for me. I was fairly cynical about the hospitals, but participating because I realised I have to make some kind of medical or nutritional or emotional or whatever interventions for my immune system to kickstart. So that meant, adopting a lot of things that I hadn't tried before, but it also meant just being fairly cynical about anyone promising single cures anywhere. I think that, the cancer isn't evil. It is a mutation telling your cells not to die, and actually they're staying not going through the normal cycle. It is an interruption to the very fabric of cellular life inside your body. It's a cellular fight. Those things are influenced by the actions of the immune system, and the immune system requires a whole lot of things in terms of nutrition, in terms of to function. So mine wasn't not functioning for any specific reason, but obviously multiple, which could be put down to diet and lifestyle generally, some environmental things in terms of exposures to different things as well. So, but no single one. So, and it was pretty clear that, the survival rates to 5 years for stage 4 lung cancer are around the 5 to 6% only survive. So, you can look at some of the studies and some of these medicines. They have 25% response rates, 30% response rates, etc. of lung cancer, broad lung cancer study groups. So I was looking at those figures and thinking, geez, how do I get into past the 96%? I don't want to be part of the 96%. So that opened up myself to agree to things that have risks, like even taking chemo for 5 months was a risky operation, because I realised later I was wasting healing time. Looking at all sorts of multiple small steps always carry pros and cons as well. So when you start to look at that, then I go, well, I have to disrupt this boss has come into my body and is dictating my fate. by changing the conditions of it. When I was finally offered immunotherapy, which a particular immunotherapy that works on blocking messages within your immune system, that again was going towards the same direction. I was happy to hear that, because that was going the same direction that seemed to be the only way out, which is if the immune system was actually functioning, doing its jobs, and ending those cancer cells. So it remains, in retrospect still, I'll say lung cancer was the best boss I ever had in Australia. Brutal, honest, but ultimately defeatable.